everybody, and welcome back to the Rage Room. My name is Amanda, and this is my co-host, Karen.
Hello, dark and mysterious people.
Welcome back, guys. It has been a week for us. How about you?
Been a wild week, yes.
It's been a long week, yes. So today's case is one of my personal faves. Everybody's got a favorite serial killer. This one is mine. We're going to be talking about Edmund Emil Kemper III. Have you ever heard of him?
Yes, definitely.
All right, so Edmund was born on December 18th, 1948, and he is known as the CoEd Killer. This man is definitely one of the top of the list for serial killers. He played a lot of people for fools. He was very smart. He had an IQ of 145, and he was charming on the outside and considered himself like just a big old meatball. That's what he just...
He thinks he's a meatball.
That's what he described himself
He's
as.
the biggest spicy meatball.
He's like, I'm just a big old goofy meatball. But don't be fooled, because this guy's an asshole.
Okay.
All right, so today's warning, y'all. This case covers graphic description of defiling corpses. So if this one isn't for you, you can check us out next week. But we hope you stick around. We'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. Mm-hmm. So Edmund, Big Ed, was 6'9" and 350 pounds.
Whoa, he was big.
Yeah. Imagine being a serial killer being that big.
No thanks.
Right, just towering over you. Basically a big dude. During Ed's reign of terror, there were also two other large killers, which is why the Santa Cruz area was in a panic, because it looked as if, even though he did have a lot of victims, it looked like he had more. But we'll talk about that.
So when you say large killers, are you talking large in stature or large as far as victims?
Victims.
Number of victims.
Yeah, the amount of people that they had killed.
Just some clarification. Okay.
Yeah. So John Linley Frazier, he was a killer, and he slayed an entire family to save the planet.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then there was Herbert Mullen, who killed 13 people, all by gunfire. And do you want to know why he killed 13 people?
By gunfire. Yeah. All at once or separately?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's not like bam, 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 bam. It was probably throughout a period of time.
Okay. Why?
To save California from earthquakes.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that was in his head, like, I'm going to kill these people. One's going to kill one to save the planet, and the other guy's like, screw the planet. I'm just going to save California from earthquakes.
So how do you determine who is... Okay, the 13 people that are going to cause earthquakes if they don't die.
Yeah, like, what narrows that down?
Yeah.
Sinking Sally? Does she... I don't know. Like... How do you pick just randomly 13 people and think that that's going to save California from earthquakes?
I don't know. It's a little comical because, well, I could go to a few different places there, but I won't.
Yeah, exactly. So what's up, Santa Cruz? You all have these three killers all at the same time in the 1970s. And with the 1970s, why are all the serial killers and predators decide to come out in the 1970s?
Something in the water, maybe?
I don't know. We've talked about this before. Like, we've even tried to, like, really rationalize it. Mm-hmm. Why the 1970s was such a big time.
Escalation in drugs, maybe, in the 60s. Kind of like,
I don't know.
Altered people's personalities. So, I mean...
Well, we know that with Charlie Manson, because he was just, like, on LSD the whole time.
Right.
But, I don't know. I don't know why the 1970s was such a big place for serial killers, but is where we really saw the uprise. So, Edmund was born in Burbank, California, and he had a troubled upbringing. His parents were Edmund Kemper Jr. So when we talk about this, there's going to be a couple times where we talk about Jr., which is his dad, and then there's Ed, his son. Okay. Just so everybody's on the same page.
All right.
And then there was his mother, Clarnell Kemper.
Clarnell.
Good old Clarnell. Mm-hmm. So Clarnell is quite the character. His parents, to say the least, were not great people. They were not a close-knit family, and Edmund's father repeatedly rejected Ed and really all the kids. Edmund also has two other sisters, and his littlest sister is named Allen, and she said that their father would actually go out of their way to, like, hone in rejection. Like, there was no love, no physical, like, touch, no nurture. Like, they'd go out of their way to reject these kids.
So why have kids in the first place?
No clue.
Pretty wild. So
that rejection was well known in the family. The parents eventually divorced in 1957 when Edmund was 9. And then the kids went on to live with their mother, Clarnell, who moved to Montana. So now she's got all three kids by herself. And so she gets a house and she puts the two girls into one room. And then she puts Edmund in the basement.
Oh boy. At 9 years old in the basement.
At 9 years old in the basement. And I'm not talking like a batch pad. This is
right.
a dark, dingy rat's basement.
Down in the basement.
Sorry, guys, if you heard that, our dogs are in this room. So she puts him in the basement and locks him in there. And there's a couple interviews with him where he talks about how when they lock him in there, he had to run to the light because you couldn't turn on the light. You had to be down there first before you could turn on the light. And it was just one single bulb.
So you get to the bottom of the steps, and it's dark, and you flip the light on when...
It's like a pull chain, like a light bulb in the middle of the room where you had to pull the chain.
Okay.
Yeah. So him staying in there caused a lot of trauma and caused a lot of fear. His little sister, Alan, also said that he would scream in the middle of the night and he was a bedwetter because he was just constantly in that fear.
Right.
So we have Edmund in the basement with constantly in this state of fear, waking up in the middle of the night. And then we have his mother as well, who also put him in a very bad headspace with low self-esteem. So she would psychologically, emotionally abuse him, call him strange and weird, and blamed everything on Edmund. And even Ed's father, he was a World War II veteran, and he said that suicide missions, wartime, and atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with her.
Jeez.
Yeah. So you're going to compare living with your wife or ex-wife to suicide missions and atomic bombs. And he actually worked at a nuclear factory as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she kind of stressed everybody out, didn't she?
She really did. And the thing about Clarnell, she was definitely not the spitting image of the mom that you would want. She was an alcoholic. She was psychologically, emotionally, and verbally abusive to Ed. And she would constantly belittle him, saying, "You're just like your father," and would constantly call him a freak and belittle him.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible.
Mm-hmm. And at 15 years old, this kid is 6'4".
Jeez.
Yeah. So I don't know if there was physical abuse going on, because I don't know that I'd want to go up against somebody who's 6'4", because she wasn't a real large person herself.
Well, think about it, though. Psychologically, she already had him intimidated. She already had him thinking so less of himself and so unworthy of love, then it doesn't matter really how big he was at that time. In his mind, he was a very small child.
And that's a good point, because this case really zones in on even everything that he goes through, and at his age, by the end of his reign of terror, his psychological age is so much littler than what he actually is, because he is stunted from her. Right. His age has stunted, and then there's more things that we're about to go into that also stunted him. So yeah, Clarnell, she seems real great as a mother. Insert sarcasm. Edmund, in an interview, says that he wanted to love his mother, and he would watch the alcohol consumption rise, the abuse would rise, and he's still I wanted to love my mom. Well,
of course. I mean, there's an affinity toward the female anyway, when when it comes to young boys, I mean, that's their main connection is their mother.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what the mother does, you still have that connection and that bond, and you want to love your mother, and you can hate her at the same time for the way she's treated you.
Kids, no matter how bad the situation is, they are always going to want their mother. Doesn't matter. That's all they've ever known. And biologically, that's how we're made up. We're created that way. He also said that she had a hard life with a lot of pain, and that when her marriage failed, he was a constant reminder of her failed marriage. Okay. So comparing him to his dad was a hit, you're just like your father, meaning it in a horrible, horrible way.
Right.
Ed had a history of killing animals in his childhood and teenage years. He killed and dismembered cats, and then one he wrapped up in a bathrobe and placed it in a suitcase in his closet.
I mean, that's the number one sign, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't Dahmer do the same thing, Jeffrey Dahmer? I mean, it's, so watch your kids, because if they're hurting animals, you might want to...
Time for therapy.
Yeah, check something out.
And so then his mom finds the cat in the closet. So can you imagine, just going in your kid's closet and be like, "Hey, Edmund, get the cat out of the closet. Get the dead cat out of the closet." He dismembered it. All its parts are just sitting in the closet wrapped up in a bathrobe.
Whoa.
Ed also decapitated Alan, his littlest sister's dolls, and he would chop their hands off as well.
Yeah.
And she said, Like, there was an instant he had bought a cap gun, and he went on a trip and got this cap gun, and so she was super jealous about it. And he brought it back. She picked it up, and she got angry because he got this cap gun, and she didn't get anything, and so she chucked it. And it broke, like, the trigger mechanism in the cap gun.
Mm-hmm.
So he ran up to her bedroom and, like, tried to pull the doll head off, but then he's like, that's not going to work. I need to make it where it can't pop on there, and took scissors and cut the head off and then cut the hands off, and he's like, now we both have broken toys.
Yeah, but
that part I understand.
That's
like
brother
and sister.
Yeah,
right.
That's a sibling thing. I mean, you know, I had a younger sister that if she got ticked off at me because she knew we would get in trouble if we didn't have our beds made and our rooms clean, so she'd get mad, and right before the parents came home from work, she'd go trash my bedroom, tear the whole thing apart. And then the parents thought that I didn't do anything, and yeah.
Yeah, that's brother and sister
pretty
stuff.
normal stuff.
Yeah. So, that instant, yes, but the other part of, like, the dolls and stuff, I don't know, it's kind of, I could see him cutting the heads off or, like, popping the heads off, but, like, cutting the hands, I don't know, I've not really seen a whole lot of kids do, but it could just be a brother and sister thing. Maybe I'm only looking at it from a serial point, sociopath funnel, I don't know. Eventually, Ed runs away from home. He went to live with his father to reunite and live with him. But Edmund Jr., so Ed's dad,
right,
had a new wife. And Ed, the son, creeped out the new wife. Like, he would just randomly stare at her and make her really uncomfortable. And then one time she was getting dressed and, like, standing in the bathroom naked, and he was staring at her.
Oh, ew.
And so you can imagine, she's like, get that kid out of here,
right,
you know?
Yeah.
So Edmund Jr., his father, takes him to his parents' home. And this is in Norfolk,
Virginia?
No. This is in North Fork, California. Okay. Say that 5 times. And this was in 1963. And so he's like, it's the holidays. We're going to go spend the holidays with your grandparents. And then on Christmas Day, he abandons him and leaves him with his grandparents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now, what are the grandparents like?
I mean, there's not a whole lot of... I mean, they seem like normal people from what I read. There's not a ton of information, but the grandfather was retired. The grandmother was an author of children's books. Like, I mean, pretty normal. There was no history of abuse or anything like that I read or could find.
Just wondering where it all trickled down from.
Mm-hmm. About 10 months into Edmund living with them, August 27th, 1964, he's 15 years old, he's 6'4".
Puberty.
Mm-hmm. He walks into the dining room table where his grandmother is working on a children's book. His grandfather had gone out to get some groceries and would be back. So Edmund comes in with a gun because he's going to go out and, you know, he's in the mountains where they are. And the grandma yells at him, she's working on this book, like, Edmund, stop shooting the birds. Stop shooting at the birds. And he turns around and shoots her twice in the head and once in the back.
Jeez.
Yeah. I don't think he liked being told no.
Being told not to shoot birds. Ooh.
Yeah. So just out of... And in an interview with him, he's like, I just wanted to know what it felt like. He said it felt good to strike out at the people that hurt me. So I don't know. I don't know if there was abuse there or if he blamed them for having to live with them. I don't know. But anyway, his grandpa comes home and he's like unloading the groceries. Edmund goes outside and shoots the grandpa because he doesn't want him to see his wife that way.
Wow.
Not angry at this point. He's like, oh, I just didn't want him to see her that way.
So all that made him snap was the grandma telling him not
stop shooting at the birds.
To shoot the birds.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So Edmund at this point's like, what do I do? He calls Mama, good old Clarnell, and she's like, you need to call the police. Have them come, call the police. So he does, and the police come and they arrest him. So when he's arrested, he is taken to a state mental facility, and he is diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, even though that later changes. He carries out his sentence at Ascardeo State Hospital for the criminally insane. Now, just so I can paint you a picture, this is an adult state mental facility. He's 15 years old. There are 1,600 inmates, 24 of them being murderers, and 800 of them were sex offenders.
My God, okay. I see where
you see where this is like, I mean, it's just completely unraveling. Like, yes, he did something wrong, but I also can see why. Because his brain is so messed up from his childhood, really.
Right.
I'm not giving him any reason to be able... Yeah, exactly. But this is the things that we need to change. And on that note, this is exactly where Ed learns his behaviors. So he learned things like, if you're going to rape a woman, you better kill her because you'll get caught. And he also was like a model prisoner. So he ended up being like really helpful, and they let him do psychological testing on other inmates. And he started to see scorecards. So he knew what he needed to get out, and he memorized everything that he needed.
He knew exactly
What to say.
The parole board, wanted to hear. Okay.
I don't know if it's the parole board, because, it's a state mental institution, so I don't know if it works that way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Being 15, and he was put into an adult
state mental
facility.
Yeah.
I guess not a parole board, but...
People also described him as pleasing, good-mannered, and normal, even though there was actually behaviors of antisocialism, sociopathic disorder, and passive aggressiveness. Edmund really learned how to walk among normal society because of this place, and even at the core of his evil, he masked it quite well. And he even talks about it like, I learned everything I needed to do.
Right. Mm-hmm. Learned how to fit in.
And on the outside, he was just a social, loving, big old meatball.
Just a goofy guy.
Big old meatball. He's eventually released in 1969, so not that long. He was only there for 5 years, maybe 6 by the time things rolled over. And so he's out, and the state hospital said, do not whatsoever release him to his mother. Like, do not. And they did.
Of course.
Of course they did. So he went right back to his mom, same behaviors, the same fighting constantly. And as life continued to carry on, Edmund then began working at a gas station. And he made a friend, and the two of them constantly talked about being police officers.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's twisty.
Hard left.
Yeah.
Hard left. His buddy did end up becoming a police officer, and he's like, man, you got to do this. Like, he drove to him on his first day. He's like, look at my car. Look at all this stuff. You got to be a police officer. And Edmund's like, they're not. Like, it's not going to happen. Turns out there was actually a law. He couldn't be a police officer. He was too big. He's 6'9".
He was too big to be a police officer.
He was too big. You're going to hand a 6'9", 350-pound guy a police officer and be like, go patrol the streets.
Well,
I've never seen a 6'9" police officer. Have you?
No, not quite 6'9", but
I've seen him tall, like 6'2", 6'4",
yeah.
maybe 6'5", but I've never seen 6'9". But back then there was actually a rule that he couldn't be a police officer. However, Ed does befriend all of the police officers, and he started hanging out with them. So they would go to this place called the Jury Room, which was a bar, and all of the police officers would go and
just hang out,
drink off the week, talk about cases. It was kind of like the good old boys club.
Right, sure.
And this is where he distinctly talked about being a meatball. He's like, I drank a lot. I would do like seven shots of tequila and just be super social with them. They became friends.
Smart, though, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. If you're a killer, or you even have it in your mind that I want to kill again, why not befriend all the police officers? Why not be their best buddy?
Mm-hmm. And this goes on. So I put this part in the story early so that we knew, but he continues to hang out with them all throughout his killings. And they're like talking about this CoEd Killer. Mm-hmm. And he's like, who the hell's that guy? Right. What are you talking about? And it kept them close.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, just wait. It gets good. He's hanging out with them, and he's still having what he calls these dark fantasies, these fantastic passions of killing. Like when he lived with his grandparents, he would have fantasies of killing his classmates. Like killing was very early on in his mind.
So it's about killing, though. It's not. Is it about any kind of rape or sexual type of?
Not at this point.
Not yet.
Not at this
there
point
yet. Okay.
No. He also admits to giving rides to hitchhikers, 200 or more of them, without harming them. Okay. So that's important because we're getting ready to go into the first and second victim, and all of his victims, except for 2, are hitchhikers. So again, with the hitchhiking.
Right. Gosh, what is it with
70s hitchhiking, murderers, it wasn't a good idea. It was not a good idea. So at this point, he's actively thinking about taking somebody's life. Energies are starting to grow very intensely. He's fighting a lot with his mother, so it's continuously feeding that rage. And then alcohol gets to be a big part of his life as well. And when he talks about when he actually goes through with the killings, he said that it was always after having an argument with his mother.
So that's how he took out his frustrations.
Displaced rage.
Right.
Yep. Which is why the psychologist when he was younger, they were like, oh, you killed your grandparents because you were mad at your mom. That's why he got the lesser sentence, because it was displaced rage. On May 7th, 1972, this would be the day of his first and second victims post-Grandma and Grandpa. The two victims were students at Fresno State University, and their names were Marianne Pesky and Anita Lucchesa. They both were 18 and hitchhiking. Surprise, surprise.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. When they were picked up by Edmund Kemper. He drove them to a deserted area and then proceeded to handcuff Pesky, Marianne, in the front. I don't know if she's in the front, but she's in the car. Okay. And then moves Lucchesa to the trunk. So now it's him and Pesky in the car. Lucchesa's in the trunk, and he tries to suffocate her with a bag. However, she bit through the bag and fought, so good for her.
Right.
He ended up stabbing her with a big knife, and then she didn't die. So in his mind, we're seeing again, he is very young-minded. He's thinking, I stab, they die, like the movies. And he even talks about it, like, every movie that I saw, the first stab, they were dead. And that doesn't happen here.
Right.
So he keeps trying to stab her. And people were asked him, like, why didn't you go for the chest? He's like, I thought about it, but her breasts were there.
What?
He was off-put, like, embarrassed about her breasts being there. And at one point, while he's stabbing her to death, he brushes up against her breast and is like, oh, sorry. But he's stabbing her to death. If you guys could see her face right now, her face just dropped. Like, her jaw just disconnected from her mouth.
Kind of like, excuse me, but, can you maybe cover that up while I stab you?
Yeah, like, oh, my bad. Like,
that's,
yeah, that's how childish his mind is. Like, he's stabbing her all over the back, and it's not working, so eventually he does slit her throat, and she succumbs to the, injury.
Okay.
And then he even talks about how horrible the stabbing was. Like, it shook him up. Like, he didn't like it. It was messy. It was violent. Like, he said it really bothered him.
So, did he ever say anything like he felt something had taken over? Mm-mm. It really wasn't him doing it, that it was some kind of evil...
Nope. Okay. In any of his interviews, he doesn't talk like that. Okay. Like, I just blacked out full of rage. I mean, yeah, he is full of rage, and he is angry because he...
But he's owning this.
But he's like, yeah, I did it.
I didn't like it. It was messy, but I'm owning that it was me. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So then he goes back to Lucchesa, who's in the trunk. He's obviously covered in blood. I mean, multiple stab wounds all over the back. It's covered in blood. He opens up the trunk, and she's like, what the hell's going on? And he's like, oh, your friend got smart with me, and I punched her in the nose. I think I broke her nose. You might want to go check on her.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So then he tries to stab Lucchesa, but the knife by that time was so dull it didn't even pierce her clothing. So he ends up strangling her.
Okay.
Gets them in the car, puts them both in the trunk, and starts heading to his apartment, where he is pulled over by a police officer for a busted taillight.
No way.
I swear to you.
One of his buddies pulls him over.
Yeah. Like, hey, Ed, you got a busted taillight. Take care.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the women were in the trunk?
Yeah, women were in the trunk. But you would think, unless it was dark, I mean, it could have been dark, I guess. But you would think, like, he would be covered in blood.
You would, notice something, see that. Yeah.
But he's just like, oh, it's my good friend Ed. You got a busted taillight. See you, man. See you at the jury room. I'll get you a shot of beer.
Wow.
Or a shot of beer, a shot of tequila. Yeah. So he goes back with these two dead bodies in his trunk, takes them back to his apartment where he then rapes their corpses, and then takes their bodies and poses them and takes pictures of them.
So he is also now...
Necrophiliac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, in case everybody's like, okay, this is too much, he does do this to every victim from here on out, so... Warning,
yeah.
Yes.
So it's not like he's an incubus at all. It's he just kills them and then sleeps with them.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then takes their pictures. Then he put them in the tub, dismembered them, and threw their body parts in random places. And later on, Pesky's head was found by hikers, but the other body was never found, and no other parts, just her head.
Wow.
Yeah. And Ed goes on his merry little way. He didn't kill again for a while, and in interviews states that he began giving rides again to women. And if they talked about the case with him in the car, he definitely wouldn't kill him.
Oh, something in common, they're interested in...
Yeah. And the police are like, red flag, stop hitchhiking. They're announcing this all the time. Women are still doing it. And he's like, I didn't kill everybody because there were cars around or people. And if they talked about my killings, I was just like, I'm not going to kill him.
Wow.
Like, cocky, like an asshole.
Yeah.
So we talked about he takes a little break, and then on September 14th, 1972, he murders 15-year-old Korean ballet dancer Aiko Koo. She had missed her ride for dance, and she was on the corner with a sign, basically hitchhiking, and her best friend was across the street from her, and she said, I remember seeing her. I hadn't seen her in a while, and I waved to her, and then I realized she was hitchhiking, and her friend was catching the bus. And so she watched Aiku get in the car, I guess I'm assuming with Edmund or whatever led up to Edmund.
From what I know about this case, her and Aiku were actually friends for quite a long time.
Oh, yeah, they were raised together. They were sisters.
And then Aiku actually started to kind of make herself a little distant from her friend. And then this occurs, she's across the street and jumps into the car with this dude.
Exactly. And they, we all do that as we get older. We kind of just find our own things. But they said she was incredibly talented dancer.
Right.
15 years old. And she hitchhiked because she was late. She had missed her bus for dance.
Wow.
So she gets in the car with him, and he immediately pulls a gun on her. And he's like, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to kill myself, and you're just going to be here to watch. 15 years old. So he drives her to a secluded area. And the craziest part about this particular scenario is at one point, once he drives her out to a secluded area, he locks himself out of the car. She has a gun under her seat. The keys are in the car. He's locked out of the car, and he talks his way back into the car. 15-year-old kid.
Like a challenge.
I'll just turn it on. Just the charm. Yeah. I guess he just charmed her where she felt safe to unlock the door. But she had it all. She had it all.
Wow.
She could have killed me. She could have drove off. She had it all.
Yeah, it's like he wanted to see if he could persuade her.
Well, it was an accident.
Oh, he didn't?
He didn't do it on purpose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was an accident. I don't know what the circumstance was, but it was a total accident. And he was like, oh, shit. I'm screwed. And then charmed his way back into the car. Then he gets back into the car. He's charmed himself in, and he attempts to suffocate her. Now we're going to talk about the mind a little bit, how young he is. He tries to suffocate her by sticking his fingers up her nose. Yeah, that's what I said too.
What?
He put two fingers, like his index finger and his middle finger, up her nose to try to suffocate her.
Okay.
I don't know if it didn't occur that we breathe through our mouth.
Didn't have his hand over her mouth or anything like that. Just okay.
I have no idea. But eventually he finds out this isn't going to work. He strangles her with her scarf.
Okay.
And then he takes her back to the apartment, rapes her body, dismembers her in the tub, and scatters her remains, and she was never found.
That's something I'm never going to understand. The whole, the sexual act, with a corpse.
Ted Bundy was into that too. Yeah. He was huge into necrophilia, and I don't understand it. I don't begin to. I think it's disgusting on so many levels. I mean, rape in general is disgusting, but necrophilia is especially disgusting.
Beyond, yeah.
So here's the kicker about what happened with Aiku. So he's got her head in the car. It's the very last body piece, and he has to go to an appointment, and not just any appointment. He has to go to his therapy appointment. Because he's mandated by the state from when he was like, I'm mad at Mama and Papa, I'm going to shoot him. So he's mandated. So he has IQ's head in the back seat. Okay?
Right.
Goes into his therapy appointment. And this is where the psychiatrist there deems him no longer a threat to others and noted a very well-adjusted young man. And they seal his record.
No way.
Yes.
I'm just a well-adjusted young man with a...
Well, at that point, he's probably
severed head in
He's
my
probably
car.
feeling real calm because he's, that all that release of adrenaline and that rage is now out. So he's like, I'm going to just check in with my therapist.
But this comes into play again with what he's learned in prison.
Mm-hmm. Turn it on.
He's learned how to turn on the charm. He knows exactly what to say. Mm-hmm. And what therapists want to hear and really just pull the wool over everyone's eyes.
Yeah. No threat. He's not a threat to others and completely a very well-adjusted man. And they seal his record. Now, I'm going to ask you, because I don't really know. So if a record is sealed, does that mean that nobody can see it? Like even police, FBI, or can they see that? I'm just curious.
I would say by a sealed record, I really don't know. I mean, my understanding is that, it's sealed.
That's
In other words,
it.
It can't be brought out again, or that type of evidence can't be used against him again. I'm not really sure 100% on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know either. I'm assuming that you can't see it. Like, it's not, like, being expunged almost. Can't see it, it's not there. At this point, Santa Cruz police and other departments are literally like, what the hell is going on? They release another statement. People stop hitchhiking. Like, red flag, don't get in the car with anybody. There's a lot of people dying. And here's where it kind of takes a hard right. At one point, they were looking at the killer to be a lesbian.
What?
Now wait. So...
What?
Yes. Okay, so listen. The reason that he is called, Edmund Kemper is called the CoEd Killer, is because women then, if they went to college, they were called CoEds
They were
for
called
CoEd.
co-eds,
Yes,
yeah.
for coeducation.
It was a very sexist term, but yeah.
Correct. So yeah, this was back in the days when like feminism started coming out, people were burning their bras, there was this distinct standout. And so in their mind, they're like, it's got to be a lesbian. Because women would only get in the car with a woman. So we're looking for a big old lesbian killer.
Still, what?
Yeah, that was one of the conclusions that they drew up in their head. Like, we've warned them so much not to get into vehicle
a car with a man.
With a man. So obviously our killer is going to be a lesbian.
Okay.
Yeah. However,
What if?
they eventually are like, okay, that was stupid. Let's move on. However, an important note is that Clarnell worked at the college. She was an administrative assistant there.
That he was killing...
That he was snatching people, right?
Right, okay.
And the reason he was getting away with it was because he talked his mother into getting him a parking permit for campus so he could use the library.
Okay.
So when people saw the sticker on his car, they assumed he was a well-known student or faculty.
Didn't think a thing of it.
Didn't think a thing
Not
of
a
it.
strange
Neither did
vehicle.
security.
Okay.
Security on campus was like, oh, hey, you got a parking permit, you're good.
Right.
So they just let him right in. And this time, Edmund moves back in with his mom on campus.
Yeah, real good idea, isn't it?
Great idea. He decides to finally buy a .22 caliber gun. And then he picks up his fourth victim on January 7th, 1973, and her name is Cindy Shaw. She was 19 years old, and he murdered her by shooting her. Murdered her and then took her back to Mama's house. Mama's not home. Takes her there, pulls the bullet out of her skull, rapes her corpse, and dismembers her with an axe in his mother's shower, and then puts her in the closet and goes out and has a drink, and then eventually...
In the closet like he did the cat when he was younger.
Yeah.
Dismembered, put the cat in the closet.
Goes out, have a drink, comes back, and then finally decides to scatter her remains. But ultimately, he buried her head in the backyard.
Wow.
As we move forward, Edmund gets his fifth and his sixth victim on February 5th, 1973, after a really bad fight he had with his mom, because...
That's his trigger.
That's his trigger. He picks up Rosalind Thorpe and 21-year-old Alice Liu. He shot them both in the head while they were still on the university campus in the car.
A little braver.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, listen to this. So he takes him back to Mom's house, pulls in the driveway. He's got him in the trunk, okay? Pulls in the driveway and decapitates them in the trunk in the driveway. Like out in the open.
Jeez.
Yeah, like red zone.
Mm-hmm.
Just going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's in full view and ended up...
And yet no one saw him, though.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming it's at night. But still, you would think, like, oh, hey, Ed, what you doing? Nothing. Just getting some stuff together. I mean, that's not an easy task.
Yeah.
And it's messy. But it must have been at night, is all I can figure.
Yeah.
However, if somebody would have walked up on him, I really think he was in such a rage at this point.
He would have. Yeah.
He would have just killed him. He puts their bodies and their heads in separate places several days later after he's defiled their corpses as well. Then we roll up on to April 20th, 1973, and this is Good Friday. So right before Easter. Edmund comes into his mother's bedroom. She had gone out to a party. He says that she got soused, is how he said it. And I'll play that audio here in a minute. And he walks in her room. She's on her bed, and she says to him, so what, I guess you want to stay up and talk all night?
Ooh.
And he's like, no, good night, and, walks away. Eventually, he goes back in and beats her with a claw hammer in her sleep and slits her throat.
So I guess maybe he did want to talk.
Yeah. He wanted to talk. He didn't want her to talk.
Oh, God.
So I'm going to play the audio for you right now.
Before I murdered my mother, I said, she's got to die. And I've got to die. More girls like that are going to die. And that's when I decided I'm going to murder my mother. I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her. And she went out to a party, she got soused, she came home, went to sleep. I was woken up by that. I came out. I walked up to her bed. She's laying there reading a paperback. As many thousands of nights before. And she said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." Shit. Nothing to her. I said, "No." I said, "Good night." And I knew I was going to kill her. You know? And I was so cold and so hard. And that's the first time in 10 years I've looked at it that way. I mean, that intensely, that honestly. It hurts. Because I'm not a lizard. I'm not from under a rock. I came out of her vagina. See? I came out of my mother. And in a rage, I went right back in. For 7 years, she said, I haven't had sex with a man because of you. My murderous son is one of our arguments. I cut off her head, and I humiliated her corpse. It's there. You know? A 6 young woman dead because of the way she raises her son and the way her son is raised, the way he grows up. And what's her closing words? I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk. God, I wish I had.
So what I hear in that is a tremendous amount of almost unbearable emotional pain inflicted on him by his mother. Mm-hmm. And one of the last things that she said was a rejection type of thing. Like, well, I guess you want to spend all night talking, but that was, like, in other words, I don't really want you in here talking to me.
Like, it was an inconvenience. Like, I guess you want to go do this.
Yeah. But at the same time, and I can see his rage in that moment. I guess I still don't understand how he turned all of this into killing other women and then being a necrophiliac, mm-hmm. after the fact. I mean, this is just...
So I think that we're dealing with a lot of displaced rage, for one. And I think he really didn't know. He had fantasized about killing his mother, but he was taking it out in other ways. And I think for him, he even talked about this at one point, like, the woman's beauty, her mind, everything is in her head. And so that's why he would decapitate him. And that to him was like you're no longer that. You're no longer beautiful. You're no longer brains. You're nothing. And I can't make sense of it because I don't think like a sociopath.
Right.
But I can also see the displaced rage in ultimately what he wanted to do to his mom when she was the apex of his anger. She was the core.
Yeah, but how many children out there, that have really crappy parents and they've abused them in many different ways. Not every kid that goes through that kind of trauma turns out to be, a monster or a killer or a rapist or any of that. So where's the disconnect, from reality? And what's the disconnect from right and wrong? And
well, first of all, they placed him in a state mental institution with adults at 15 years old, and 15 is such a crucial age for the mind to grow. You're going through puberty. All of those traits that he learned were from other inmates.
So really the serial killer is not born. They are made.
They are made. This is definitely a serious case of nature versus nurture. Mm-hmm. Because he had no nurturing from anybody. Constantly rejected, constantly put down, to the point where he's like, I'm going to kill Grandma and Grandpa because I just am so angry. And then they send him literally to his role models, right? Where he's learning all of these traits, release him in society, back to the abuser, again, for all of this still to continue. So Edmund goes on and he decapitates his mother. Like he says in the video, he cuts out her tongue and her larynx, puts them down the garbage disposal, and turns it on.
Really taking away
Her voice.
Her voice, completely.
He is definitely action to metaphor.
Right.
100%.
Right, right.
And he even says, he said he found it to be appropriate as much as she bitched and yelled at me to chop up her tongue and her vocal cord, or her larynx. Yeah. Then he goes on to put his penis inside of her mouth and rapes her head. After that, he puts her head on a mantle and uses it as a dartboard. And then screams at her for hours to the point where he loses his voice and his throat hurts. Like just screaming at her while the rage had been pent up.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's some major rage.
It's a type of rage I've never really seen. Like you hear about serial killers ramping and how they get full of rage.
Yeah, but this is on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then to go back to the beginning of the story where he's like, I wanted to love my mother. So he's got that feeling too, like, I wanted to love you, you know? So yeah, this case is definitely full of a lot of rage and some serious mommy issues.
Yeah.
So then he continued to rape her body, and then he stuffed her in a closet and went out and had a drink.
With his police officer buddies, I bet.
Probably.
Wow.
He then calls Clarnell's best friend, 59-year-old Sally Hallett, and asks her over for dinner. So he's out having a drink, calls her, she comes over. When she gets there, he strangles her, decapitates her, rapes her body as well, and then stuffs her in the closet too.
So anything and everything to do with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Taking away everything. Her mom's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just eradicating everything to do. Or did he do this so there would be, like, no friend coming over to check on her? And, you know...
No, it was because she was closest to Clarnell.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
He steals her car and begins driving. He said, I just drove. So eventually he finds himself in Pueblo, Colorado, where he eventually pulls over and uses a payphone to call the cops and confess to all, like, him only murdering his mother and her friend. Okay? He calls, and they're actually like, yeah, okay, Ed, because it's his buddies, right?
Right.
They're like, yeah, okay, whatever. They hang up on him. So he calls back, and he's like, no, I really freaking did this. I also killed this to prove it to you. And they're like, oh, shit.
Right.
Yeah. So they go and arrest him. Edmund faced 8 counts of first-degree murder and actually attempted suicide twice while he was locked up. And he even tried an insanity plea by admitting that he ate his victims. Like, he admitted to cannibalism. Okay. And then later he recanted when they were like, dude, you're not insane. You're a sociopath. Like, you're a psychopath.
Right.
And he's like, oh, okay, well, I didn't really eat them then.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so he recanted the cannibalism. He was sentenced to 7 life sentences and is still alive to this day.
And where is he?
So he is actually at California Medical Facility. It is a prison for the criminally insane. Fun fact about this place, he actually served time with Charlie Manson and Herbert Mullen, the other guy that killed 13 people to prevent earthquakes. So he was like hanging out with all these big people as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Another fun fact that you may or may not know. So interesting.
Interesting? What's interesting? Tell me. Is that kind of similar to interesting?
Interestingly enough, no. That he followed in the footsteps of his dear grandmother, which he murdered. Mm-hmm. He records audio for children's books to this day. You can actually look them up on YouTube. And he actually records these audio stories or books for blind children.
Mm-hmm. So imagine, like, tucking your kid in, like, let's have a nighttime story, and you hear Edmund Kemper reading you a book. Serial killer.
Yeah, exactly.
Fast forward to, I'm not sure what year this is, but an evangelistic pastor does a documentary. And he goes in and he's, like, trying to interview Charlie Manson, trying to interview all of these killers. And he stumbles upon this guy and he starts talking to him. He's like, he's a big guy. I'm just, talking. And the guard comes up and taps him on the shoulder and he's like, you know who that is? Now, they're not protected. They were in the same room. And he's like, no. He's like, that's Edmund Kemper. He's a serial killer. He's murdered multiple people. And he's like, oh. So then they do an interview with him, which I'm going to play a little bit of the audio because I don't want to get too far into religious stuff. But he goes on to be like, I was a Christian and, I was baptized and Protestant, something of that nature. I'll play the audio. He's like, I just got off the path. Most people get off the path with, like, life.
Have a beer or something.
He gets off the path and murders people. That's really far left of off the path.
Yeah, that's kind of off the cliff.
Yeah. So I'm going to play that audio now.
We're in one of America's toughest maximum security prisons. At the end of this corridor is serial killer Ed Kemper. But beyond the headlines, beyond the notorious crimes, is a man who turned himself over to God 20 years ago. I'm told by the guards when he first came here he was so violent that it took many guards to get him into a cell. And off and on he was in solitary confinement for 2 years. But today he is a man at peace, transformed because of the grace of God. Join me as we hear from Ed Kemper and meet him face to face. And you be the judge. Thank you, Ed, for talking with us today. How long have you been in prison?
17 years.
Did you believe in God when you first came to prison?
When I first came to prison, I had been a baptized Christian, a fundamentalist, Protestant Christian on the streets some years before. And I got caught up in a lot of trinkets, a lot of flashy things, involvements that were not Christian, that were not wholesome. And I completely fell away from my faith and from my devotion to Christ. When I came to prison, there was a lot of distraction in here too, but also there was a lot of time to contemplate, a lot of time to think about all the damage that had happened to me and the people around me because of my attitude, because of life out there, distractions out there, and not facing up to some real problems I needed to deal with.
As you know, much has been written about you. When you first came to prison, you were described as a monster, a maniac. How different is the Ed Kemper before our camera today?
It's possible for people to be more relaxed with me than with some other people. It might well be thought to be an uptight situation. I'm a very large person, 6'9", weigh about 350 pounds. And you would think someone that large is going to be prone toward violence and aggression and overbearing personality. And I'm working toward quite the opposite. So I would say the difference between 16, 17 years ago, where I was considered friendly, an easygoing person, that was a facade. Now it's real.
Well, call me Cynical Sally,
Cynical Sally.
but I do believe that Ed is serving up some bullshit sandwiches.
I really do. It sounds like your typical somebody that got caught. Somebody's had to spend a lot of time by themselves, and they're trying to...
And again, he knows and he has learned
What to
exactly
say.
what to say, how to say it, and who to say it to in order to charm his way to whatever it is that he is after.
Exactly. Because, again, he's an asshole. Like, you'll never convince me otherwise. He's an asshole. There's more audio, guys. You can go on YouTube. He is the chattiest Kathy serial killer. There is a documentary on Netflix, and I want to say it's not Criminal Minds, but I'd have to look it up. I'll link it on the Facebook page. But they actually have an actor who portrays him very, very well. And he was one of the first breaks in serial killing when the FBI started profiling. Before profiling was a thing for a serial killer,
okay.
He was the one that talked to them about, this is what you're looking for. And he talked all the time. He's a chatty Cathy. He never shuts up. He is willing to go into the worst details. There's interviews out there. Knock yourselves out. So yeah, this is the case of Edmund Kemper, the CoEd Killer.
And just when you think things can't get worse or his serial killers can't get worse, you've got old Ed.
Yeah, you have old Ed. And he's still alive. And you too can get his audiobooks and let your little kids listen to him.
No, I don't think so. Not today.
All right, guys, that is our case today. I know it's a long one. We were going to do it in a 2-part series, but we decided to just go ahead and give it all to you. So thanks for coming back out to the Rage Room. We greatly appreciate it. We have been blown away by the amount of love and support that this channel has gotten. There are no words. So
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
you're awesome. Rate and review us. It does help the podcast. Also, follow us on our Facebook page, all under the Rage Room. We are on TikTok. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. What else are we on? YouTube. I think that's it.
Are we on Spotify?
Oh yeah, we're on, yeah, all the podcast platforms. We're on every single one of them.
All of them. Okay.
We're on Spotify, Google, Apple, whatever you've got in your hand, you can find us. So check us out. Thanks again for coming back out, guys. We love you. We'll see you next Saturday morning. Grab yourself a good cup of coffee because it's probably really early or really late. This drops at midnight. See you next time, guys.
Bye.